Cassidy had always thought she knew her marriage to Connor inside and out. They had been together for 8 years. It was supposed to be a partnership, an enduring bond where they both supported each other, navigating life's challenges together. But as time wore on, Cassidy found herself playing a role, not living her own life. She had morphed into what she believed Connor and his family expected her to be, the perfect wife. Yet, perfection in Connor's world was always just out of reach. From the outside, their life seemed like the ideal American dream, a beautiful house in the suburbs, a high-paying job at a respected marketing agency, a carefully curated social circle, and a marriage that, on paper, appeared unbreakable. But beneath the surface, things were far from ideal. Cassidy's life had become a constant effort to meet the expectations of others. She had learned to bend and twist herself into the mold that Connor's mother, Delilah, had set for her. Every day felt like an endless attempt to prove herself worthy of being in this high-achieving world. She knew this game all too well, but it had cost her. Delilah, the ever-critical matriarch, was always lurking in the background. There was no winning with her. Thanksgiving dinner, too dry. Christmas decorations, too tacky. Cassidy's promotion at work. Well, it's not exactly corporate leadership, but it's nice that you're trying, Delilah would say with a thin, patronizing smile. Nothing Cassidy did was ever enough. Delilah had a way of making her feel small, making her question her every choice. Even her own husband, Connor, had adopted the same mindset, always prioritizing his mother's opinion over hers. For years, Cassidy had put her head down, swallowed her pride, and done whatever she could to make them both proud. She learned to cook Delilah's famous meatloaf. Even though she was a vegetarian, she highlighted her naturally dark hair to achieve the polished blonde look that Delilah deemed more fitting for the type of woman Connor should be married to. She tried, day in and day out, to be the perfect wife, the one that would finally make Connor and Delilah proud. But deep down, Cassidy knew something was missing. There was no real love in this marriage anymore, just obligation. She had tried to ignore it for years, focusing on making everything around her perfect, convinced that if she just tried hard enough, everything would fall into place. As months passed, Cassidy's heart ached as she watched Connor's increasing disinterest. He had become distant, absorbed in his work and, it seemed, in something or someone else. His late nights had become more frequent, his phone increasingly off limits. But Cassidy, ever the optimist, brushed it off as stress from work, convinced that once Connor made partner, things would calm down. It was always just one more promotion or just one more milestone. And Cassidy, in her blind dedication to him, had bought into the idea that everything would improve once Connor's career took off. It was on the morning of their scheduled trip to the Maldives that Cassidy's world came crashing down. She had spent over a year planning this surprise vacation, a dream getaway that she hoped would reignite the spark in their marriage. She had saved every penny, from extra shifts at her agency to freelance work on the side, putting aside money for a luxurious vacation they both deserved. The Maldives was supposed to be a fresh start, an opportunity to reconnect, to revive the intimacy that had long been missing in their relationship. But Cassidy never expected that the day she had so carefully planned would end in devastation. The morning of the flight, Cassidy woke up early, excited. She prepared Connor's favorite breakfast, eggs Benedict with smoked salmon and fresh dill. She set the table with the expensive dinnerware that Delilah had given them for their wedding, the kind of dinnerware meant for special occasions. She even wore the blue sundress that Connor had once complimented her on during their honeymoon. It was the perfect setup, a perfectly planned breakfast, a perfectly planned surprise, all leading up to their dream vacation. But when the doorbell rang, everything began to unravel. Cassidy opened the door to find Delilah standing there, with her trademark air of superiority and Louis Vuitton luggage by her side. Cassidy, darling, where's Connor? The car service is waiting, Delilah said, air-kissing Cassidy's cheek. Cassidy's stomach dropped. She thought they were driving to the airport, not taking a luxury car service. The confusion started to set in. Wait, I thought we were driving, Cassidy asked, trying to make sense of the situation. Delilah sighed, clearly annoyed. No, sweetie. We're flying first class. The car is outside waiting. Connor arranged everything. Men never communicate the details. Typical. Delilah swept past Cassidy, not even waiting for a response. Cassidy felt her heart sink even deeper. This wasn't how she had envisioned the morning. This wasn't the dream trip she had planned. Where was Connor? Why wasn't he there? When they reached the car, Cassidy noticed that the suitcase Connor was carrying wasn't the one she had packed for him. It was bigger, more suitable for a longer trip. Something didn't feel right. Connor, where's the blue Samsonite suitcase I packed for you? Cassidy asked, her voice tinged with confusion and rising dread. Connor, who had been quiet until now, simply shrugged and said, "This one's bigger. It's more suitable for a long trip." A long trip. Cassidy's mind raced. The Maldives vacation she had meticulously planned for over a year was supposed to last 2 weeks. But now, everything was starting to fall apart. Something was very wrong. Still, Cassidy pressed on, following them out of the car, suitcase in hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just a misunderstanding. There had to be an explanation. But deep down, she knew something was coming. Something that would change everything. As they made their way to the airport, Cassidy remained silent, her mind spinning. When they finally reached the terminal, Cassidy thought maybe things would make sense. Maybe Connor would explain why he was acting so strange. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. But then, as they stood in line, Cassidy heard the words that would shatter her world. "We're taking my new girlfriend instead. She needs a break from her dead-end job," Connor said, his voice so casual it made Cassidy's blood run cold. The world seemed to stop. The words hung in the air like poison gas, suffocating Cassidy. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She stood there, stunned, as the truth hit her like a freight train. He was leaving her. He was taking another woman on their dream vacation. Cassidy's entire world seemed to collapse in an instant. Delilah, ever the accomplice, smirked beside her son. "Cassidy, surely you saw this coming. Connor needs someone who matches his ambitions." The words were sharp, cutting through Cassidy's already fragile heart. Cassidy's body felt numb as she stood there, rooted to the ground. She couldn't believe what was happening. This was the man she had devoted her life to, the man she had sacrificed everything for. And now he was replacing her with someone else, a woman who, to Cassidy's shock, she recognized Tessa, the woman who had been at the firm's holiday party, the woman who had laughed loudly and flirted with Connor, the woman who had been sleeping with her husband for who knows how long. Cassidy couldn't move. She couldn't speak. She just stood there, watching Connor and Tessa walk away. They were leaving, and Cassidy wasn't coming with them. Everything she had worked for, every sacrifice, every effort to be perfect for him and his family, it was all for nothing. But Cassidy wasn't about to fall apart. She wasn't going to cry. No. Cassidy had spent 8 years bending to their will, living in a world that didn't care about her needs or desires. And now, she was done. She wasn't going to beg for Connor to stay. She wasn't going to chase him. Cassidy had a plan. Her moment of clarity arrived in that instant. Standing there at the airport, feeling the weight of everything she had lost, she realized something profound. The best revenge wasn't to scream or cry. The best revenge was to reclaim her life. And she would do exactly that. Cassidy's world had collapsed in an instant, but in the wreckage, a new sense of clarity began to emerge. For the first time in years, she wasn't clouded by confusion or denial. The truth was laid bare before her. Connor, the man she had spent 8 years with, had chosen someone else over her. He had used her, manipulated her, and now he was leaving her for a younger, more ambitious woman. Someone who could fulfill the image he and his mother had constructed for him. But Cassidy wasn't going to let this define her any longer. As she stood in the airport terminal, watching Connor and Tessa walk away, Cassidy felt an overwhelming surge of anger. But it wasn't the kind of anger that made her want to lash out. No, this was different. It was the kind of anger that ignited something inside her. A deep, burning desire to take back control of her life. She had spent so long trying to fit into a world that wasn't hers, trying to please people who would never appreciate her. And now, she was done. With shaky hands, Cassidy retrieved her phone from her purse and quickly made the first call of her new life. It wasn't to Connor, though. No, she wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, she called the travel agent who had booked her dream vacation to the Maldives.
Hey,
"This is Cassidy Mitchell," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I need to make some changes to the booking. I'm afraid my husband and his mother won't be attending the trip as planned. Could you reroute them to a different destination, a remoter one? If possible, something unconventional." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The agent clearly wasn't sure what Cassidy meant, but she listened. Cassidy explained with calm precision that she wanted to change the entire itinerary. The Maldives was no longer on the table. Instead, she had a new plan, a better one, a plan that would give Connor, Delilah, and Tessa exactly what they deserved. "Please book them for an eco retreat in Siberia," Cassidy instructed, her voice growing firmer as she spoke. "Make it as remote as possible. I want them to experience the wilderness, something real, no cell service, limited amenities. And please, make sure the accommodations are authentic, rustic, as in no luxury. It's an experience, not a vacation." The agent hesitated for a moment, but Cassidy's tone brooked no argument. It was done. The deal was sealed. Connor, Delilah, and Tessa would be sent to a remote part of Siberia, far from the beaches and luxury they had expected. They would find themselves in an isolated, industrial landscape, forced to contend with a harsh environment and the cold reality of their entitled behavior. As Cassidy hung up, she felt a sense of power begin to flow back into her. She had spent years allowing her life to be shaped by the expectations of others. Now, she was shaping her own future, for the first time in a long time. She was doing something for herself, not for Connor, not for Delilah, and certainly not for Tessa. This was her moment of liberation, but that wasn't all. Cassidy had another task to handle, one that would truly sever the ties that bound her to this toxic marriage. She opened a new bank account in her name, transferring the portion of their savings that had been shared between her and Connor. It wasn't theft, it wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. Over the years, Connor had treated their joint savings as his own. He had never contributed to the emergency fund, always assuming that Cassidy would pick up the slack. But now, Cassidy took what was hers, what she had earned, the money she had saved for their future. The money that had been drained by his neglect and selfishness was now in her control. As she clicked confirm on the transfer, Cassidy felt a sense of freedom wash over her. The tight grip that Connor and his family had on her life was slipping away, and she was the one holding the reins. The power she had given up for so long was now hers again, with her finances now separate and secure. Cassidy took a deep breath and turned her attention to the next phase of her escape plan. She needed a fresh start. She needed to leave behind the life she had once tried so hard to build with Connor and Delilah. Cassidy had already started looking for a new apartment, one that would be hers alone, free from the expectations of her in-laws. She had made the decision to move out, to start anew, away from the suffocating influence of Connor and his family. But Cassidy wasn't done yet. She knew that Connor and Delilah would try to spin their Siberian nightmare into a story that suited their narrative. One where they were the victims, where Cassidy's actions were painted as petty revenge. But Cassidy had been in the background for too long, quietly enduring their criticism, their manipulation, and their condescension. Now, it was time for her to rewrite the story. She opened her laptop and began working on another task, something she had been meaning to do for months, but never had the courage to start. Cassidy had once been a project manager for a high-end event planning company. She had organized corporate retreats, incentive trips, and VIP events, managing everything from the travel arrangements to the crisis situations that popped up at the last minute. She was skilled at handling difficult clients, keeping everything running smoothly, even when things went wrong. Now, Cassidy put those skills to work. She knew that Connor, Delilah, and Tessa would be desperate for help once they realized their vacation had been rerouted to Siberia. They would try to call in favors from their connections, but Cassidy had already thought of everything. She called the travel agency, made sure the booking was solid, and confirmed the non-refundable terms. She was ready. There would be no turning back for them. This was their reality now. As she sat in the coffee shop, typing away on her laptop, Cassidy allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about making Connor suffer. It was about regaining control over her life, something she had lost the moment she married him. This was Cassidy's moment to break free, to finally see herself as more than just a shadow in someone else's life. When the text message from Connor arrived, Cassidy didn't even flinch. Flight diverted to Moscow. It read, "What the hell is Dixon? Can't get through to travel agent." Cassidy smiled. It was happening. She typed back, her fingers steady, her heart calm. "How unfortunate. I forwarded all the documentation to your email. The terms and conditions you signed are quite clear about rerouting protocols." The reply came quickly. Connor was furious, but Cassidy remained unfazed. "This is ridiculous. Fix it," she responded, her voice dripping with the cool detachment she had long ago perfected. "I'm afraid I can't. As you mentioned, we're getting divorced. Your travel arrangements are no longer my concern. Enjoy Siberia. I hear it's lovely this time of year." With that, Cassidy muted his number. She was done with him. The power she had given him for so long was now gone, and she felt lighter than she had in years. The next few days after Cassidy's decisive actions felt surreal. It was as if she had stepped out of the life she had once known, slipping into something new, something entirely her own. As she walked through the streets of her neighborhood, her steps felt lighter, less burdened. She had been so focused on the idea of pleasing others, of conforming to the expectations of her marriage, that she had forgotten how it felt to simply be herself. But now, that was all changing. Cassidy's first task was to establish her independence, and she did so with determination. Her new apartment was small but cozy, nothing like the grand house she had once shared with Connor and Delilah. It wasn't in the affluent neighborhood where Delilah's friends might see her. But Cassidy didn't care. She didn't need to impress anyone anymore. She needed a place that was hers. She furnished it with the pieces that spoke to her soul, not to someone else's idea of what her life should look like. As she unpacked her things, she noticed how much she had accumulated over the years, each item a symbol of the life she had tried to build for Connor's family. Now she was shedding that life, piece by piece. The designer clothes, the expensive trinkets, the books she had read but had never fully embraced. Everything had been chosen for her, by them. She was done with that. Cassidy kept a few things, sentimental items that meant something to her, but most of it was left behind. Among the items she kept was a small, forgotten sketchbook she had tucked away years ago. It was filled with designs, clothing designs she had once dreamed of pursuing, but had abandoned when Connor convinced her to put her career aside. As she flipped through the pages, a spark of inspiration flickered inside her. These sketches were good. No, they were great. They were better than she had remembered. She had a talent for design. A talent she had buried for too long in the name of compromise and sacrifice. Cassidy took a photo of one of the designs and sent it to her sister, who had always encouraged her creativity. "What do you think?" "Too impractical," she asked, unsure. Her sister's response came quickly. "It's gorgeous. When did you start designing again?" "I want one in every color." For the first time in years, Cassidy felt a rush of excitement. Maybe this was her path forward. Maybe she wasn't meant to be the perfect wife, or the one who was always trying to fit into someone else's world. Maybe her dreams could be something bigger, something she could create for herself. Meanwhile, the reality of what Cassidy had done to Connor, Delilah, and Tessa began to sink in. She checked the flight tracker once more. They were still in Moscow, trying to salvage what was left of their trip. The longer they were stuck there, the more Cassidy imagined their frustration, their anger, their confusion. And the best part, they had no idea what was coming next. Cassidy had arranged for them to spend the next leg of their trip in Dixon, Siberia, a remote eco-retreat that was far from luxurious. She had seen the look on Delilah's face when she realized her son's trip to paradise had turned into an unforgiving wilderness experience. Delilah was used to five-star accommodations, private beaches, and elegant resorts. Now, she would be staying in a converted Soviet-era research station, with limited amenities and a group of guides who barely spoke English. As for Tessa, Cassidy imagined the look of shock on her face as she realized that her tropical vacation had turned into a cold, uncomfortable experience in the middle of the Arctic Circle. She could picture her standing in a heavy woolen outfit designed for industrial workers, not the chic linen clothes she had packed. The luxury vacation they had all been expecting was now replaced by the stark reality of their entitled behavior. Cassidy knew it was harsh, but she wasn't looking for petty revenge. She was looking for closure. The people who had belittled her, manipulated her, and treated her as nothing more than a stepping stone for their ambitions were about to experience a taste of the consequences of their actions. But Cassidy was no longer motivated by anger. She wasn't consumed by hatred for them. She simply knew that she had to reclaim her own life and her own happiness. This was her chance to reset, to rebuild her identity. And rebuild she did. Over the next week, Cassidy threw herself into her career. She updated her resume, reached out to former colleagues, and began networking again, something she hadn't done in years. When the offer from Miguel, her former colleague, came through for the international position she had once passed up, Cassidy didn't hesitate. The job would require a lot of travel, something Connor had always disapproved of. But Cassidy didn't care anymore. She wasn't living her life for him. She was living it for herself. The job was a perfect fit. It was a fresh start, a chance to take on a role that not only paid well, but also allowed her to grow and challenge herself. It was everything she had put on hold for 8 years, and now it was finally within her reach. Cassidy accepted the offer without a second thought, making plans to leave for her new life in just 2 weeks. But before she left, Cassidy allowed herself to enjoy one more small victory. Watching the fallout from her well-planned revenge unfold, she knew that once Connor, Delilah, and Tessa landed in Dixon, they would face the full brunt of the situation. The Siberian wilderness would be their prison, and the realization of their mistake would be inevitable. As she sat in her new apartment, savoring a quiet evening alone, Cassidy checked her phone. She saw that Tessa had posted a story on Instagram, a blurry photo of the Moscow terminal, captioned with a crying emoji. It was a small moment of satisfaction for Cassidy, knowing that her well-executed plan had caught them off guard. She wasn't angry, she wasn't vengeful, but she had taken back what was hers. She had reclaimed her power, and with that, Cassidy moved forward. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Connor. His message read, "Flight diverted to Moscow. Mechanical issues. What the hell is Dixon?" Can't get through to the travel agent. Cassidy's fingers hovered over her phone, but she didn't respond. There was no need to. She had already won. She was no longer shackled by their expectations. She was free. As the days passed, Cassidy focused on her future. The idea of rebuilding was no longer daunting. It felt exciting. She began to reconnect with her professional network, set up new meetings, and even went on a date with someone who saw her for who she truly was. Not someone's wife or accessory, but someone with her own dreams and aspirations. It wasn't about moving on with someone new, but about rediscovering herself. Eventually, Cassidy received another message from Connor. This time, he had figured out what had happened. The messages were full of fury, full of threats. "You won't get away with this," he wrote. "We're stuck in a frozen wasteland eating food I wouldn't feed to animals. My mother is beside herself. Tessa hasn't stopped crying. This isn't funny." Cassidy read the message with a sense of detachment. She felt no need to respond. She had already taken her revenge. She had already won. This wasn't about hurting them. It was about finding herself again, about regaining control, about stepping into her power. She had done what she needed to do to free herself. And the satisfaction she felt wasn't about their suffering, but about the freedom that awaited her. In the end, Cassidy had finally broken free. She had learned that the best revenge wasn't about dramatic confrontations or bitter exchanges. It was about reclaiming your life and your power. It was about finding your own path, your own happiness, and never looking back.